Hello and welcome to episode number 200 of the Alcohol ReThink Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the 200th episode of the Alcohol ReThink Podcast. What an amazing thing to say. I've really been embracing that number at the minute and embracing the amount of listens we've been having to the podcast. And as this episode was approaching, I was really thinking about who I'd love to get onto the show, because I think we've had some incredible guests over the years. And today, I'm delighted to bring on a very special guest. I've got Rachel Hart. Rachel, I was first aware of back in 2019. So that first year when I stopped drinking, I listened to a podcast with herself and Brooke Castillo on the life coach podcast called Why You Drink. And it was incredible. It was so refreshing to hear about alcohol and sobriety in a different way. You know, that idea of being sat around in a circle and having to declare yourself as an alcoholic, well, that was kind of absolutely blown out of the water for me. Learning about how the brain works, learning about our thoughts, feelings, dopamine, all of these things. Like, these are many of the things that I've learned from Rachel. She is an author of a book of Why Can't I Drink Like Everybody Else? She has done lots of different podcast interviews, been on Mel Robbins, been published in the Times and lots of other publications, and has also just brought out the archetypes, which I'm really fascinated to learn about in this show. So Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for having me for your 200th episode. That's such an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. And it's so amazing how sobriety has brought so many things, but you know, having you here on the show today is almost like coming full circle in my journey a little bit, you know, listening to the work that you were putting out when I first stopped drinking. And I'd like to be here 6 years later and have you on the podcast and to talk about all things sobriety related. Like, it's really amazing. I'm really honored to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Pleasure. All right, cool. Well, I gave you a little introduction, but perhaps you could kind of give your own personal one to everyone listening.
Yeah, where do I begin? Well, alcohol came into my life when I started college. I was 17, and you know, I very quickly thought that I had found like the magic elixir to life, and it was the thing that I had been longing for in terms of just feeling more confident, letting go of my insecurities, feeling like I could be myself. That was a belief that I had for a very long time in my own journey, was that, you know, alcohol was the thing that let my fun self, my silly self, my true self shine, which is fascinating looking back on it now, because I see all the ways in which that actually wasn't true. But I really held very dearly to that belief. And when, you know, alcohol started causing problems for me, and I will say, you know, I drank a lot right out of the gate. I definitely thought that, you know, the whole point of drinking, you know, again, I was 17, but the whole point of drinking was just to get wasted. And so, you know, at first that wasn't a problem, but when I didn't think it was a problem, but when I took those behaviors out of college, I moved to New York City. I started doing things that, you know, maybe were safe on a small college campus that were not so safe in a city of 8 million people. But even when I was faced with a lot of negative consequences from my drinking, so physical and emotional, and the ways in which it impacted relationships and friendships, I had such a hard time. I just wrestled so much in the inside, because I truly felt like, no, but this is just the only way to get the fun me. Like this, how I'm just going to go through life not being able to access this part of myself, and not being able to just let loose and have fun in the way that I wanted to. So I really wrestled with it for a very long time. I went, you know, all throughout my 20s, I kind of went back and forth between like waking up and saying like, oh my God, we're never doing that again.
Mm-hmm.
And then that promise would last sometimes for a couple days, sometimes for a couple weeks, sometimes, you know, for many months. But I always found myself eventually returning, because, for me, it really was this sense of, yeah, I don't like how I feel, and I don't like the regret, and I don't like feeling like I can't control myself, but I just was not willing to give up this desire that I had to just have fun, and to just not care, and to just not have an inner critic. And so I was in that kind of tug of war for a very long time. And I didn't resonate, like you said, I didn't resonate with the idea of like, okay, so I have to, sit in a circle and declare that I'm an alcoholic, and abstain for the rest of my life, and admit that I have a disease, and admit that there's just something different about my brain. I knew that my relationship with alcohol, I knew that there were problems with it. I knew that it didn't feel right. I looked at how other people in my life drank, and I saw that, just even having that first glass of wine, I would consume it more quickly. I felt like I had more desire. So, I wasn't sitting back being like, yeah, everything's fine here. But I also just did not resonate at all with what at that time, were, I felt like, the only solutions that were out in the world. And so I really felt like I was in this kind of no man's land, and I didn't know where to turn. And that is actually what put me on the journey of doing a lot of self-development, really trying to understand myself. That's how I came across, the think, feel, act cycle, this idea that our behaviors don't just happen, they're connected to what's unfolding in our brain. And like all of that took me here, to becoming a coach, to starting a business, to working with people, and really just wanting to offer an alternative out there. Because I know that because things regarding alcohol use are approached still often in a very black and white manner. Either, you're someone who can handle alcohol, or you're someone who can't. Either, you have this disease of your brain, or you don't. That black and white approach, I think, really kept me from getting the help and support that I needed. And so that's really what I wanted to do, was to say, listen, there's a different way that we can think about this. There's a different way that we can talk about it. We can have different conversations. We don't have to be stuck in the conversation that we've been having, at least in the US, since the 1930s. Right. And that's what brought me here, really.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, it's so true. And, I wasn't like necessarily trying to call out AA, right? Like, obviously they've got a way and it works for certain people, but I just knew that wasn't a way that interested me, as did you. And so you were able to find out something different. And, you mentioned that idea of black and white, and I agree. I still think there is that element. But as a coach as well, I noticed that that's just very human thing to do in nature anyway. Like, our beliefs are very binary, right? So when you started drinking at 17 years old, you had that belief like, this is for me, right? And it was just it was either that or nothing.
Yep.
And so that's what we're kind of working with,
Yeah, and I think that so much of where this journey has led me is to really understand that, like you said, that black and white approach in everything, not just how we treat over drinking and people who struggle with alcohol, but really that black and white approach with everything causes so many problems. And I think the beauty of the work that we do is really, really helping people say, like, we don't have to use this paradigm. We can start to question things. We can not only question everything that we're told out in society, but we can also question all the beliefs that we have about ourselves and what's possible for us, and the beliefs that we have about alcohol. And so just kind of opening it up to see that we have a lot more freedom in what we believe than certainly I thought, back when I was like, well, this is the only way for me to have fun, Rachel.
When would you say that point was that you actually realized that they were beliefs and not facts?
Well, I will tell you, one of the real massive breakthroughs for me is that I always felt very confused from my drinking. So I did often go out with the purpose of like, we're just getting drunk. That's what I'm doing. But I didn't always drink too much. And so my drinking often felt very confusing because I thought like, well, okay, if there is something just different about my brain, why is it that sometimes I would go out after work with colleagues and we would get drinks and, 8 o'clock would roll around and I would head home. And sometimes it would be, what I thought was going to be a quick after work drink would turn it into like 2 a.m. at the kebab truck, right? There was just that, the fact that there seemed like there was no rhyme or reason, right? It felt to me like, well, if there's something really just wrong with my brain, then it should just be all the time that I'm drinking way too much. Like, why am I able to sometimes say, you know what, I'm going to go home. You know what, I've had enough. So that didn't make sense to me. And I struggled with that for a really long time. And so, one of those real aha moments for me, and I don't know if I recognized in this moment that this was just a thought, not a fact, but it was when I learned about the idea that our actions didn't just happen, right? It often felt to me like my drinking just happened to me. And it was like, I just don't know what it's going to look like. Like, we're just going to cross our fingers that tonight's not a mess. And can I swear on your podcast, by the way?
Yeah, you can swear
Okay,
away,
just double checking.
Yeah.
because the aha moment for me when I was introduced to the idea of the think, feel, act cycle, and like the actions, what our decisions around alcohol aren't just happening, and I recognized, oh, some nights I have a thought of fuck it. And that thought, it's one of those things where it was happening at a very unconscious level, yet when it was pointed out to me, I could immediately identify. That there were some nights I was just like, fuck it. Right. And
Yeah.
after I
The
had
fuck it
that
button.
thought, yeah, my drinking looked totally different. Right. I didn't have the thought, fuck it, and then go home at 8 p.m. And that just, I can remember where I was. I remember that moment so vividly because it was like all of a sudden I was given, it felt like a framework to explain everything that had felt so mysterious to me, right? All of a sudden I could say, oh, I am thinking. There are thoughts, right? And they may be happening so unconsciously that I don't even notice them at the time, but they are influencing what then happens, right? They are influencing whether or not I keep going or I go home, whether or not I have another. And that, even though that was so early on in my journey, it was such a massive relief because I really did feel for the longest time like, I just don't know. It just doesn't make any sense and nobody can explain it. And the only explanation I get is that something about you, Rachel, is different and something about your brain is different. And that doesn't also make sense to me either. And so it really was like getting that framework was such a profound, eye-opening moment and relief for me because I was like, okay, it was like now I had the breadcrumbs to follow where I felt before like I was just groping in the dark.
Yeah. And did that, like, what's the belief that was then sprouted as a result of that, right? So you had that moment, that insight. How did that then start changing how you were thinking?
Well, I think one of the big things that it helped me understand, and it helped me approach changing my relationship with alcohol in a very different way because again, I was very black and white with it. I was very like, okay, we're drinking or we're not allowed to drink. Right? And so that was very much the place that I was in. And I think what shifted for me was this sense of, oh, I'm having different thoughts. I'm having different feelings. That's connected to my drinking. And I saw really for the first time that it was no longer a question of, okay, how much are you going to drink? Or are you going to stop drinking forever? It was, I shifted away from focusing so much on alcohol and really recognizing that there were benefits from drinking, even though it often created lots of negative consequences. There were also benefits, there were upsides, and I needed to understand how do I start to create those benefits for myself? How do I start to, deal with my inner critic, have more confidence in social situations, find ways to blow off steam after a bad day at work? How do I start to do that in a way that isn't, I'm just going to go to the bar, or I'm just going to stop by the wine shop on the way home? And so I think that's what it really helped me see, because the think, feel, act cycle, it wasn't just about explaining your behaviors around just drinking. It was explaining your behaviors writ large. And so I think that headed me in a very different direction. So, at that point I remember saying, I know that I would benefit right now from taking a break from drinking. Right. And I had done that many times before. Right. But I really recognized that it wasn't totally about not drinking, that was going to be helpful, because I knew I needed to learn some work or learn some skills and do some deep work and understand, pieces about why I kept kind of falling into these cycles that then led to drinking. But so I didn't make a declaration of, okay, I'm doing this for the rest of my life and we're never drinking again. I just said, I just know that I need some time away. And that was very different than what I had done before, because in the past, I had spent a decade of like, oh, well, you were an idiot last night. And then telling myself that I couldn't drink was really kind of a punishment, right? It was like, you were so bad, you were so stupid, you were, you have so much shame that now this is your punishment. And so even though to the outside, it may have looked to other people like I was engaging in the same thing, which was I was taking a step back from drinking, on the inside, it was just so dramatically different, because it really wasn't about, it had nothing to do with punishment. It had to do with, I need to figure this piece out. Right. And I don't, and I think it was also very freeing for me personally to just be like, I don't know where this journey is going to take me. Right. But I don't need to decide right now. I don't need to decide right now that I'm never going to have a drink for the rest of my life. I just need to figure out some of these pieces here. Right. Because they're clearly impacting my decisions around alcohol. They're impacting my relationship with alcohol. And if I don't get that figured out, then, there's no way that I could at some point have it in my life in a healthier way. And so that was just like a radically different shift.
Yeah. Well, and that's that doing it differently, right? Because in the past, you would have stopped drinking as a way to punish yourself because you were embarrassed, ashamed, whatever it may have been. But what's really like almost perverse about that is that you punish yourself. Well, I'm generalizing here, right? But tell me if I'm wrong. But you punish yourself, or like other guys I work with punish themselves because they're fed up with the drinking and they did something that they regret, whatever it may be. But then after a while, the reward becomes drinking, because like, oh, I haven't drunk for a while, so like, I'll have a beer. Like, I deserve a beer, like, after all this time of not drinking. So there's no learning in the middle. Whereas what you're kind of advocating there is that this time it was different because you were willing to look at yourself differently, and it wasn't that all or nothing approach, right? It wasn't that black and white thinking.
And I was willing to look at alcohol as not just it wasn't just like this thing to venerate or this thing to demonize. It was to understand that even when I was drinking way too much, there were benefits. There were upsides in that moment. And that was a really radical position for me to take. And to really understand, like, my brain must believe that there are benefits beyond just, I really love a great gin and tonic. Like, I really love an IPA, right? Like, my brain must believe that there are benefits. And, you mentioned the Drink Archetypes, but that's what the kind of genesis of the archetypes came from, this idea that, if we're clinging to something so tightly that we can see is creating downsides. And it doesn't even have to be that those downsides are, or, the consequences are like so bad and so huge, but just, you can see, like, you just don't like how you feel, right? You don't like taking out your recycle and seeing how many empty bottles are in there, right? Like, if you're clinging so tightly to something, despite seeing that it's not, in some ways it is detrimental to your well-being, there must be a reason. And I think the explanation that I always got before was like, well, just because alcohol is addictive, like full stop. That's the end of the story. And, the coming up with the archetypes and understanding the archetypes was really a way for me, after working with so many thousands of people, to say, like, there's something else going on here. Yes, alcohol is addictive. Yes, it activates the reward center in the brain. And also, there's all of this meaning that we attach to it. There's so much about what the drink represents. And so often that is why we cling so tightly, right? We're clinging often to the story of what this drink provides. And so the archetypes, they really are a way to help people understand that there's more going on here than just, well, alcohol's addictive and some people can't handle addictive story or substances, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that's a beautiful segue to begin looking at what some of the archetypes are, because I know this is something you've worked really hard on to get out into the world. So I'd love to hear. Can we go through? There's 8,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
8 archetypes.
All right.
And I will
Awesome.
say that, it really came from me working with so many different people, from men and women and all different ages, and seeing, my brain is very good at spotting patterns and seeing kind of the patterns. And I think that was also, I'll just add, that was something that was really, really important for me, because for a very long time I felt very alone in my struggle and I felt like nobody could relate. And so I think this is one of the things that the archetypes really helps people see, is that there are these underlying patterns. There are these associations that your brain makes with alcohol that then influences the decisions that you make. And so there's 8 archetypes. The first one is called the upgrade archetype, and it's the idea that we look to alcohol as a way to elevate a situation or make things more special. So it's a little bit more of like, the traditional, this is how we celebrate. It can show up in a lot of different places. It can show up, as like fancy dinners and vacation, and just kind of like, it's Friday, there's something to celebrate. And to understand, for all of the archetypes to understand, what we think we are craving is beyond just that, maybe that beautiful glass of champagne, right? It's what we think that it represents in that moment. There's also the connector archetype. So this is the idea of how humans for thousands of years have used alcohol as a way to kind of create and cement bonds that we have with other people, right?
Yeah.
So this idea of, I can be more social, I can let my guard down. This is how we connect. This is a thing that the group is doing together. There is the reward archetype.
So sorry, before we move on, so like the
Yeah.
connector, would you say that's also, because alcohol, is naturally produced a lot in fruit and stuff? Is that because it was used in a lot of ceremonies and stuff like that? Would you say that's kind of like part of that connection archetype as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of the ritual that we see that has existed alongside with alcohol for thousands of years, I think that a lot of that can show up in the connector as well. So often it's kind of just like it is that sense of belonging, right? That sense of, we are doing this thing and it is a communal thing. And so many times, it's not so much saying no to the drink. It's that sense of like, now I'm on the outside. Now I no longer belong. Now I no longer fit in. Now I'm no longer part of this group, right? If you didn't have any of that story around it, yeah, yes, it may be a little challenging, because your reward center, your lower brain is like, hey, we're watching the game. Like, this is what we normally do, is have a beer. But I think what makes that kind of like clinging, that attachment to it, is that feeling like you're on the outside looking in, feeling like you can't connect this same way with others, feeling like you can't drop your guard, feeling like, you're not part of the group. there's the reward archetype. So you mentioned this, like, there's alcohol has long been used as like a treat for working hard, right? It's kind of like, I was working hard all day. I was, maybe I was doing all the things and going through my to-do list and putting everybody's needs and everybody's wants and everybody's desires ahead of my own. So like, what's in it for me, right? It often is that kind of typical end the day, go straight to the bar or straight home for, I'm going to have that drink. There's the escape archetype. The escape archetype is more about using alcohol as a way to forget what's bothering you. So the idea of, this is how I drown my sorrows. This is how I turn off my brain, and I don't have to think about this thing, whether it is, something that's been bothering you from your day, or whether it's something maybe that's, you're worried about in the future, or something that happened 10 years ago, right? It's just like, this is a way that I get to forget. This is a way that I get to be kind of separate and disconnected from my mind.
Yeah, I mean, that comes up a lot in my coaching, right? The idea of just wanting to switch off, just to turn off the mind, to stop worrying, like all of these kinds of things. It's a very common one, I would say. But with the irony of that, though, is that, often you're also trying to escape the not wanting to drink sometimes as well. So you want to switch off from your thoughts about not drinking, and then it's just easier to drink.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, switching off, that comes up a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I it's so interesting when I work with people on this. I think we all just kind of say it as a given. I used to just say this as a given of like, I just don't want to think anymore. Right. I just don't want to think. And I'm always asking people, listen, thinking doesn't feel bad unless the contents of your thoughts are not very fun. And to just have people kind of back up and understand what is actually the thing that you want to switch off, because if you're just like thinking, well, if you are having, peaceful thoughts, or, if you are having generally happy thoughts, we wouldn't want to switch off from it. And so it's just taking, I think, to that next step to really, or the next layer to really understand, well, what's going on here? What is that thing that I want to disconnect from? And, I think the other thing that happens with the escape archetype is, we're so kind of like desperate for, a lot of times it comes up around big emotions. Like, I just can't feel this feeling anymore. And so it's this idea of, this is the thing that's going to give me relief. But of course, then this is the thing that makes you less resilient, right? Because that emotion is going to come up again. And you've now taught your brain that, oh, I can't handle this big feeling without alcohol, right? So you actually feel less resilient in the face of the emotion. I think that's one of the, the fascinating things about the archetypes. I mean, I really break them down. I have a book called The Ultimate Guide to Drinking Less, and I have a quiz that really breaks this down. But, all of these, it's not just what the drink comes to represent for your brain. And by the way, it can represent different things in different situations. It's not like we're only ever one archetype. People feel like lots of different archetypes will appear for them.
Yeah, good. Yeah, get out of that black and white thinking if you're listening.
Get out of that black and white
It's not like you have to choose one. It's like you could be multiple ones at different times as well. So it's kind of like meeting yourself in the middle.
Yeah. But to understand, so it's not just what it's not just the kind of meaning that we have unconsciously associated with drinking, but it's also what your brain is learning. I think this is a big piece of it that is overlooked. It's like, well, what is your brain learning if it's like, well, when we're doing fancy special things, we have to have bubbly, right? Or we have to be drinking. What is it learning around that? What is then, what is your brain taking away from that? And all like that really, really helped me. And I think helps people that I work with to understand, like, oh, this isn't just this black and white thing. It's like the drink is good or the drink is bad. It's really like, oh, my brain is learning something here. And unless I proactively decide to teach it something else, it's going to cling to this idea. So I talk about this, I talked about this a bit in my own journey with what my brain had learned around socializing and especially being in new environments and meeting new people, and feeling like the only way that I could be comfortable is if I had a drink. So this is something I call the mask archetype. It can, often the mask and the connector can go hand in hand, but I think the mask is really much more like, if I'm not drinking, I'm not going to go, right? Because it's just, I'm not going to have a good time. I'm not going to be able to relax. It really is much more of that, alcohol as a way to kind of quiet the inner critic, drink over your insecurities, feel like you can be confident in social situations.
Putting on a brave face is an expression we use.
Yeah. So the mask is one that comes up as well. There's another archetype called the hourglass. The hourglass is all about, I talk about it like using alcohol as either a way to pass the time. So this might be where it's just like many people have kind of long stretches of like, I don't know what to do with myself. I don't know what to do with myself in the evenings. I don't know what to do with myself on the weekends. And so often, alcohol can become that way of entertaining yourself when you either feel bored, or the hourglass can kind of come up when it's like, I don't really want to be doing what I'm doing right now. I don't really want to be with these people. I don't really want to be, like listening to my in-laws talk, right? Like so it becomes this way, alcohol kind of becomes this way to make situations or people even more tolerable. And understanding what your brain learns about that. And then there's two more archetypes. There's the release archetype and the remedy archetype. The release is very much of like, this is how I blow off steam. I stop caring. This is my way to kind of, I think, also let go of all of the ideas that I have around like who I'm supposed to be and how I'm supposed to behave. I think that this often very much coincided for me with when I would like really want to drink a lot. The release often gets very connected to like, you're not going to be satisfied with like 2 drinks, right? You're totally want to shed your skin. And then the remedy archetype is much more around the ways that we as a society have often used alcohol to help with insomnia or help with physical pain or chronic pain. It comes up a lot. This idea that the drink is the only thing that helps. And so, a lot of people will hear me go through the archetypes and they'll be like, oh my God, I identify with like a lot of them. And that's not a problem, right? And I think the other thing that's really fascinating about the archetypes is they're not an indication of problematic drinking, right? You can have someone who you might look at and say, well, they're not drinking, they're not drinking a lot. They don't drink too much. They can still have archetypes activated, right? So it's not like, I only have these archetypes if, something is bad or problematic or wrong with my drinking, or if I relate to multiples, that means it's worse. It's really just the unconscious meaning that gets attached that then will help you understand why maybe you're saying yes to temptation, or why maybe you're clinging to something when you're like, I don't really feel like it's serving me, or why also a lot of people will say, and I was in this position for a long time of like, yeah, I can totally not drink, but life goes from feeling like it's technicolor to black and white. It's like, it's not as enjoyable. And I don't want to live a life like that. That was a big thing for me, that I was like, but I don't want to have a life where it doesn't feel as spontaneous or free or fun or exciting or all of those things that I really for a long time thought I could only get through drinking. And so again, it's really just about using the archetypes to better understand your own habit, your own patterns, your own desire, and have it be as a way to get insight rather than, oh, well, we have to wear the label and we've decided you're the upgrade and you must now identify with that for the rest of your life. It's not, it's not about that at all.
Yeah, nice. I love it. I think it's such a great point as well, right? If you are listening and you identify with any of these archetypes, it's not about judging yourself for it. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, I understand. Like, in these situations, through many of the ones that you've described, Rachel, like, oh, that sounds like me. And you go, well, if it sounds like me, okay, so what's alcohol doing for me in those moments, right? Like what you said earlier, what's the upside? What am I getting out of this? And all of a sudden that really flips the script on its head, doesn't it? Because now you're not focused on like, what's the matter with me? Why can't I do this? Like you say, why can't I drink like everyone else? You're actually being curious and go, oh, maybe this is doing something for me. And as you said, how can I do it differently? And that's the key. That's how we can start looking at this differently. That's the rethink.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, having brought the archetypes out into the world, what is kind of some of the feedback that you're getting? How is it landing with people out there that you've been sharing it with?
I mean, it's been really incredibly gratifying, because I think one of the things that I hear from people, especially when they really, they really dive into the archetypes, and, they understand all of them have, a mindset trap. All of them are teaching the brain something. All of them have different common obstacles, and all of them have different deeper, what I talk about, like deeper desires connected to them. And, laying it out for people in that way, one of the biggest things that I've heard from people is how it just takes away a lot of the shame. And because all of a sudden, I think this really is the key. All of a sudden, it helps explain something that felt very mysterious. For the longest time, I really was in this trap of, well, I should just know better. I should just be able to learn from my mistakes. I should be able to learn my lesson, right? I should just stop being so stupid. And to really see that what all of that messaging that we get has the unfortunate consequence of creating a lot of shame. Because if you're looking around your life, as I was saying, like, how can you have everything so together and be such a fuck up when it comes to your drinking, Rachel? I mean, that's really how I felt so intensely. And
Yeah, it's
how
brutal
can you
as well.
It's brutal, right? And how can you just keep making the same mistake over and over? And when are you going to learn? And when are you going to grow out of this? Like, you're not 17 anymore. Get your shit together. All of that just created so much intense shame for me. And so I think that's been the biggest feedback that I've gotten, is that not only does it give people a new way to really understand their desire and to see it as more than like, I just love wine, right? Or I've always just been really into beer. To understand it at a deeper level. But when you have that understanding and you see that your brain is learning something, and you see how those learnings actually make it more difficult for you, that's actually what's getting in the way. It just, I don't want to say that it releases all shame, but I think it gives people, it kind of like cracks the door open, right? It like gives you a little bit of light when often people feel so much darkness. I felt so much kind of just hopelessness around my drinking, and didn't want to talk about it with anyone, and didn't, resisted getting help or support because of all the shame that I felt. And so I think that's really like the biggest thing that it gives for people.
Beautiful. I think that's one of the saddest, hardest things, isn't it? Is thinking that you're alone, thinking that there's something wrong with you, thinking that you can't speak to anybody, because all that does is just kind of like drive you deeper into that shame as well.
Well, I mean, it's why my first book was called Why Can't I Drink Like Everyone Else, which truly was a thought that I had all the time, but I think is indicative of how much intense aloneness I felt around my drinking. Because yes, of course I knew that there were other people that struggled, but my situation, I just felt like I couldn't relate it to anyone. I felt incredibly alone in it, and really kind of saw myself as like, all these people, I don't know, like the rest of my family and my friends, like they're just able to do it normally, and something is like, something must be like deeply wrong with me, and I don't understand what that is. And I don't understand, I often felt I felt for the longest time that I had really lost the genetic lottery when it came to my brain. Because as much as I didn't want to I rejected the idea that there was something wrong and different about my brain, but I also couldn't let go of, well, why do you keep being so stupid? Why do you keep making all these, repeating these same mistakes if there isn't something really wrong with you? So I really did feel for the longest time, like, I don't know, I guess I just like drew the short straw or something when it came to like people getting brains, and like mine's just a dud. I don't know. Which sounds so ridiculous now, because I think, one of the things that I want people to really understand and to take away is that your brain is this amazing, invaluable tool that you have that is going to be the thing that helps you figure it out, right? You just haven't been given the tools. Nobody gave you the framework before, right? Nobody we don't get good education on not only just the basics of alcohol, but we don't get good education on habits and how they form and how to change them and how our brain works and how the reward center works. Like, we're just in this vacuum of a lack of information. And so really your brain is going to be the thing right now that you might be cursing, but it really is going to be the thing that sees you on your way forward and helps you figure this out, right? It's not your brain. It's just, it's really the kind of the backwards way that we are taught to approach this, and the lack of information that we're given around all of these things.
Yeah. I reckon there's so many people listening and going, yeah, that's me. Or that's how my brain works. And I remember that, not too dissimilar, stopping drinking, and like, I remember thinking to myself, like, I don't even understand what a belief is. Like, what are beliefs? I don't get that, right? Like, and I allowed myself to be so confused by that whole idea of even knowing what a belief was. And I think it's not until you stop drinking, not until you can do this while you're drinking as well, of course, is learning. But for me, it didn't happen till post. So I didn't start understanding why I was drinking and what drinking was doing for me until I'd stopped. But what the archetypes does is that helps you to see that now. It starts to reveal, right? It starts to highlight all of these different things you can focus on. And what I was noticing as you were going through is, it's like, what are you tolerating that you don't want to be? What are you doing that you don't want to be? What are the boundaries that are being crossed that you aren't speaking up for, right? Where are you bored? Where are you unfulfilled? Where are you unsatisfied? Where do you need to address anxiety? Like, there's so many like different layers to it, which is what the archetypes, moving through them or identifying with them, can help you to start exploring and look at alternatives.
Yeah, and I think actually that, one of the real things that I wanted to create, and I'm feel really happy that this is something that people can use wherever they are in their journey. So I think that a lot of also what I resisted and what I pushed back against was the idea of, okay, so there's a solution out there, if you're struggling with your drinking, but you got to decide that you're never drinking again for the rest of your life. And I think what happens, unfortunately, with that, when we have that, like, that really, that's the only solution, is that a lot of people very early on have little bits of intuition, or some people talk about like a little just kind of like knowing or a whisper inside, like, something about my drinking I don't really like, or something about my relationship with alcohol just, it feels off to me. And so we'll have these kind of quiet knowings, but what happened for me and what I watch happen with so many people is we will ignore them because we think, well, if I have a problem with drinking, I have to stop forever. I can never drink again. Like, sobriety is it's like, that is the only solution. And so I think that, like, that's another piece out there, that because and again, things are very much changing on this front, but because we've been so limited, I think, in what society offers as, here are some of the solutions, because we've been limited in that, a lot of people do ignore those just like early knowings of like, something here is not sitting right. But it's like, oh God, if I go down that path, I'm going down the path of like, I have to admit that I'm an alcoholic and never drink again. And so that's
it's
also
not very
what I hope.
is it? It's not.
Yeah, but it's like, I mean, not only do I think that's just not the path for everyone, I just think that we need more more tools and frameworks that help with early intervention, right? If people felt less shame, if they felt less stigma, if they felt like there were more possibilities, available for what in the future your relationship with alcohol might look like, I
Yeah.
think that more people would be willing earlier on to say, you know what? I got to pause and just examine what's going on here and get curious about this. But when we have a very narrow kind of defined path that like this is the path to follow, what happens for, someone like me and a lot of people that I work with is like, okay, I'm just going to ignore that thought. Right. I'm not going to like that intuition. No, thank you. I don't want to hear you because I think you're signing me up for something that I don't want at all. So that idea of, we should have so much more, not just in the way of information and education, but in the way of early intervention. And that I think is a place where we are sorely lacking. And I hope that the archetypes can be that kind of early intervention for people. And just that, let me pause, let me get curious about this. Let me understand this. And nothing here is saying that I have a problem or anything's wrong with me or this is a sign of something really bad. It's just understanding the ways that humans have come to use alcohol in these very distinct, discrete ways over human history.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of a belief one of a guy I used to work with, and he just believed that he loved a beer, right? And that was it. And it was just such a simple sentence, right? I'll just love a beer, right? As if there was nothing else that existed. But it was like, yeah, but why do you love a beer, right? Like, what's that beer doing for you?
Yeah.
Once you start unpacking all of that, then that's when it all starts really changing, for sure.
Yeah. I'm always like, and what else do you love about it?
Yeah.
Right. Because I think that that's like the kind of, I don't know, the tug of war that people feel in and that I felt in is like, okay, well then if I'm going to stop, then I have to demonize it. And I have to be like, alcohol is poison. And why am I poisoning myself? And I don't, you know what I mean? It felt like, okay, yes, you love the gin and tonic. And what else do you love about it, Rachel? And what do you love about it differently in a social situation that you love when you're ending work? Right? Like what else? So I think it's just the idea of yes and, right? As opposed
Fun
to,
game.
I think a lot of times it feels like, well, if I'm going to change, then I'm going to have to talk myself out of the fact that I just truly, I truly enjoy the taste. And I'm just saying like, there's just a little bit more there. What if we say like, you love the beer and maybe you love something else too about it. So like, let's be curious what that is.
Yeah, right. Maybe you love the connection, like maybe you love the having the fun, like whatever it may be. Yeah, because let's face it, if you are drinking and you think the only option is not drinking, then that's a scary prospect, especially when your brain's been learning for your adult life more than likely that alcohol is so integral to so many of the things that you do. Yeah. Amazing. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for coming on and celebrating 200 episodes and more importantly, sharing the 8 archetypes because I think they're fantastic. And I know so many people listening and are going to get so much from them. Before you go, I love to ask a question of all my guests, and that's what does it mean to be radically human?
To be radically human?
Mm.
Oh, wow. I think it means it's, speaking of the conversation that we have about the black and white and how we often want to decide we're either this or that. It's to be radically human to me is to be both. It's to be like all the things and to embrace all of that. And so just even thinking like, I can be really smart and I can be really stupid in areas, right? And I can be really generous and I can be really selfish. And embracing that and not seeing it as a problem. I often talk about this with people, the idea that, we use alcohol often to numb ourselves. And so many times people will be like, oh God, I like didn't want to feel my feelings again. And it's like, welcome to being human. Like sometimes we are very present with our feelings and sometimes we don't want to be with our feelings. And it's not about judging, either side of that dichotomy as good or bad or right or wrong, but just recognizing when we're in it and recognizing that it's a very human and also knowing that there are other ways to help in those moments when you may have said like, for me, it was like, well, the only way to not feel is I just have to just go to the place of like, I've had so much to drink.
Yeah.
And so I think that to me is kind of what it means is to like embrace both of that and not embrace like the light and the dark and not make one better than the other or one wrong, and just see it as like, yeah, that's just like, welcome to the human experience.
Yeah, that's awesome. Love it. All right. Well, thank you once again. Before you go, if anyone wants to find out more about the archetypes, find out about your work, your podcast, which I didn't mention earlier on, so I need to get that in there now, where would they need to go and listen and read and watch?
Yeah, so you can go to rachelhart.com, but also if you want to take the quiz, so we have an archetype quiz, you can go to drinktype.com. That's all one word, and you can take the quiz there. I also have my newest book is called The Ultimate Guide to Drinking Less. So you can find out about that on the website and when you take the quiz. So there's a lot of avenues. And then I have a podcast as well called Take a Break from Drinking.
Yeah, incredible. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Go check out what your archetype is or could be and start being curious, start learning from it. All right, take care. Thank you, everybody. See you again soon. Bye-bye for now.